Welcome back to these Lightroom tutorials. If this is your second visit, then I appreciate that. Thank you for coming back. In the first one we looked at where the catalogue was stored for Lightroom. In this one we're actually going to take a look at what the catalogue actually stores, because we didn't discuss that at all. Lightroom is what is known as a non-destructive editor. So what that actually means is the changes we make to our images never actually affect the original file. All of those changes are stored inside the catalogue. In fact, Lightroom stores three fundamental pieces of information. It stores where our files are on our computer, it stores the changes we make in the development module, and it also stores information, organisational information such as keywords and ratings, stuff that's known as metadata. Let's look at that first thing. To tell Lightroom where our files are on our computer, we just import them into the catalogue, and we can do that quite simply by clicking on the import button down here. On the left hand side you'll see we've got my computer file structure and the files that we're demonstrating already broken out here. So let's just import this Peak District. When I select it, it shows me the photos that I'm going to import. It's only going to bring in new photos and we can put them straight in. And what Lightroom does is it shows you just this previous import. You'll see highlighted down here. So now we've got those two new pictures into our catalogue, and Lightroom has now stored where they are on my computer system. I can see my previous pictures that I've imported just by clicking on the catalogue folder option down here. So Med Cruise, and you'll see we've got the Peak District one. And another nice thing we can do from here is if we right click on it, we can actually show the parent folder, which is sometimes useful. So Places, and again if I right click on here we can actually view that in Finder or in Windows Explorer, and we can see those files on our actual disk. So let's close that down. One of the biggest things that people talk to me about is when files appear to go missing in the catalogue, and that may happen because you've moved them on the disk and then Lightroom no longer knows where you've moved them to. Let's demonstrate that. I'm going to flick over to my Finder application, and as you know we've imported this Peak District folder. Let's say on my disk I moved that folder. I'm just going to do a Command Control C to copy that, and I'm going to paste it up in this top level. Paste that back in. If I come back to Lightroom now, you'll see it's got this little question mark and greyed out the Peak District, and that's because where we've moved the files, Lightroom no longer knows where they are. And you'll see we've got a little question mark here, and up here we get the little exclamation mark on the pictures. This is quite easy to resolve. All we need to do is tell Lightroom where we've moved them to, a bit like we did with the catalogue. So what we can actually do is we can do Find Missing Folder, and if I click on that I can come back to my disk drive and go into our folder, our files, photos, and this is now where we've got Peak District. This is where we've moved it to. Highlight it, choose the folder, and you'll see life is good again. Everyone is happy. So pretty straightforward. I'd recommend, if you actually want to move folders around though, to do it in Lightroom itself. We can simply drag and drop this back into Places, for example. It's going to ask me if I want to move them, which I do, and now you can see it's back under here. If we view that in Finder again or Explorer, you'll see it's gone back into its original location. Okay, so back in Lightroom, and we're going to look at the second aspect of the catalogue now, which is storing edits to your pictures. We'll come back to importing stuff a little later. We've only glossed over it just to show you how a catalogue stores where the files are. But we'll come back to that. For now though, let's have a look at editing. I'm going to pick a picture and we're just going to go into the develop module. And what's important here from a catalogue point of view is if you look down the side we have this history option, and if you watch that, whenever we make an edit to our picture we'll see that history get updated. So I'm just going to bring the shadows up in this picture. There we go. And we'll bring the sky highlights down a little bit. And you'll see over here it's storing those incremental changes to the picture. Now that information also gets written back to the catalogue. As I mentioned earlier, Lightroom's non-destructive, so what that actually means is those changes have not been written back to that original file, and we can prove that if we open the file up in something like Photoshop. If I just come over to Photoshop, I'm going to open up that raw file. This is Peak District, and as you can see it's opening up in Adobe RAW, but the edits that we've just made haven't actually been applied to that raw picture. There is a slight caveat to this, and I'm just going to close this down and show you back in Lightroom what that is. Just swap back to my grid view. Do you remember we spoke about catalogue settings? There were some other options in here that we would look at a little bit further down the road. One of them is under the metadata option, and it's this one here, automatically write changes to XMP. If we select that one now and close that down, and we come back into our picture, and let's just make the sky a little bit bluer with a linear gradient tool. And what we'll do is we'll change the color temperature. That's fine. Good. Just say that that's done. Get rid of that. Now watch what happens if we open up that file in Photoshop. Just open the file again. You'll notice this time there's this XMP file that's stored here. And if I open the file, the original RAW file, you can now see that those changes have been applied. We'll just cancel out that again. We'll just go back to that setting, catalogue settings, metadata. I'm going to uncheck it. I don't typically use the write changes to XMP file. The reason for that is I usually open images directly from within Lightroom, and when we do that we get the option to carry the changes through automatically. But it's a personal taste thing at the end of the day, and if you find yourself making basic edits in Lightroom and then wanting to edit it further in Photoshop separately, then sometimes the XMP file is a good option. The last thing we said the catalogue stores is organisational data like keywords and ratings, that kind of thing. So we're just going to go back to our grid view. Now when we import pictures into Lightroom, some of that metadata gets created automatically for us. We can see it under here. We have things like the different types of lenses. We can change cameras. We can do things by date. We're obviously looking at many pictures here. If I come up a level to places, you'll see that now expands out. We get a lot more options, different years, that kind of thing. So it's based on the highest level that you're looking at your photos at the end of the day. This, like I said, is automatically created when you import it based on camera information, but we can set up our own metadata, and typically that'll be over here under keywording. We can enter keywords. So if we pick this picture here, for example, and we put cows, we can separate them out with commas, rocks, and it's in the Peak District. We will say that. Oops. And it was on holiday. So those keywords now have been added into the catalogue against this image. So we can actually search for things under text now. We click on text, we can look for cows. And there's our picture. Again, we'll look at keywording and metadata in much more detail further on. But for now, in this lesson, it's just about what's being stored in the catalogue. And that's the three things covered. Where files are, development changes, and keywording, metadata, that kind of information. In the next one, we'll look at importing stuff into the Lightroom catalogue in a little bit more detail. Thanks for watching.